So that's when it comes to how do I know if an exercise is right for me? How do I know if what I'm doing is too much? What am I looking for to help me know if this is a good one for me? Well,
All right, welcome back to the Strong Mom Channel, moms. Today we are debunking and myth busting and hopefully finally putting a rest to some of the mainstream diastasis recti claims that you find on the Googleverse or social media. And that I'm doing that today with an expert in all things pelvic floor physiotherapy and diastasis recti, Manira Houdani. So I want to introduce Manira so you get a sense of her background and her expertise in this area of women's health. Manira Houdani obtained her master's in science in physical rehabilitation from the University of Toronto in 2009. In her nearly 10 years of experience as a clinician, she's devoted the bulk of her career to women's health. Manira was the director of the pelvic health program at Bosner Center in Health for Health in Toronto, where most of her caseload was dedicated to helping women with diastasis recti abdominis. And today you're going to hear us talk about diastasis, or DRA, or DR for short. In addition to presenting novel concepts on DRA in physiotherapy conferences, she's presented to local obstetricians, gynecologists, as well as family physicians regarding the necessity of pelvic floor and core assessments in the postnatal population. She also teaches courses on diastasis recti abdominis to rehab and fitness professionals and provides mentorship to others seeking to further their knowledge and skills on diastasis. She's passionately committed to spreading DRA awareness to both professionals and patients by providing information that is up-to-date, evidence-based, and reliable. So, Manira, I just want to start by telling you that you've been really instrumental in my career. From my humble beginnings of teaching indoor fitness classes, you've been doing a wonderful job in distilling and teaching us trainers about diastasis, about what the research actually says, right? Like, reading research is tough. So you are distilling it all down for us, telling us what it means, and here's how to apply it. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate you, because that just helps me to help my clients, right? And that is our one huge common goal at the end of the day, in helping our clients to minimize their diastasis.
oh my God, thank you so much for saying that. It is so true. Like, research can be difficult to read through and to make sense of. And good thing is I love it. So I'll continue doing that, and I will try to keep it as simple as possible to make it as accessible as possible to all the trainers and physios, so that, yeah, more women who have diastasis can be led down a path that doesn't involve so much fear
Mm-hmm.
with regards to what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. And so that's really ultimately my mission, is to reduce that fear and hopefully eliminate it, because there is no reason for it to be such a heightened, I guess, emotional journey.
Mm-hmm.
When someone has diastasis, yes, there are emotional pieces there, but I think some of the things that we used to say, and the way we used to word it and understand it, added to it. And so that's kind of where I want to go in, and I'm just trying to help people understand what it is, what it isn't, so we don't have to add to that intense emotion, anxiety, worry, and fear around it.
Right. Exactly. So, shall we do some myth busting?
Right, sure, let's
And
get
putting to
started.
rest some of those old things on social media and YouTube and the such. So, one thing that many moms come to me when they're, looking for help with their diastasis is, they just kind of have this blanket statement: my core is weak, or I got back pain and I can't do this because my core is weak, or I got the doming, right? And kind of at the end of the day, well, certainly they've read that for somewhere. I must have a weak core because I have diastasis. But I know that, Manira, you talk about diastasis doesn't mean our core is weak. So if that's true, what does diastasis, what's really going on with our postpartum cores if it's not weakness?
Okay. Yeah, so that's a big question, because even in the research, we are still trying to uncover what does it mean to have diastasis. we do not see very clear associations with or correlations with things like pelvic girdle pain, with low back pain, with incontinence and other pelvic floor conditions. So we can't really say even at this point that diastasis means that you also have these other
Mm.
things, or that you're more prone to getting these other things, or
Right.
that there's that kind of association. The other thing, like you mentioned, is this idea that I have diastasis, therefore my core is weak. Therefore, I am susceptible to injury. I'm vulnerable. Therefore, my core is dysfunctional. Therefore, I'm going to look like this for the rest of my life. And
Mhm.
so we can go down this path of what we are sort of attaching as a story to what diastasis is. And so what's actually happening is we're starting to shift away from just seeing diastasis as an issue of just the linea alba. We're starting to appreciate that in pregnancy the whole abdomen was stretched, not just that midline connective tissue strip. And we understand that because we're growing a baby, and there's going to be a lot of space that is needed for that. So the abdominal wall is going to stretch.
Right.
So what we are left with afterwards is usually muscles and tissues that are in a state of lingering laxity, and in some cases, and in many cases, a state of muscle weakness. And that weakness in and of itself is something that we can address through exercises with personal trainers, physiotherapists working together. It's something that we can actually work on and build upon.
Hmm.
But what that also means is that if you are experiencing weakness, and if you have a widened linea alba, it doesn't necessarily mean that the widened linea alba is causing the weakness.
Right.
Generally speaking, we have the weakness because the tissues of the abdomen were stretched out. And
Right.
so that weakness is associated to those kinds of structural changes that just happen to stick around for some afterwards, but
Right.
not necessarily because there's a wider linea alba. So just kind of separating it out like that. And then what's also really, I guess, empowering to know is that when there is a weakened muscle and weakened tissues, we can actually do stuff for that. We can actually build strength back in those
Mhm.
tissues and in those muscles, and we can improve those things. And
Exactly.
so if you are feeling weak right now, it can be a temporary place. It doesn't mean you're going to be like that forever, and there's lots that we can do to improve that,
Right.
I
And I think
think.
a lot goes along with, the weakness and the mental thing, but it's also how much sleep am I getting, and am I eating well, and how stressed am I with this new baby? How many weeks or months postpartum am I with this baby? So all of those things also go, a big distance in playing a role there for sure with weakness or yeah, weakness and
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like that sense of weakness can in a way almost be subjective,
Mhm.
because one day you might feel weak. And then the next day you might actually feel like you're on top of your game, and you actually might sense that you're a bit stronger that day, and you don't know what it is, but you're just having a good day. And it
Right.
could be, you know what, maybe you had a better sleep that night, or maybe you were more restful, maybe you weren't so fatigued from all of the things that you were doing during the day, or maybe it was just like the fact that you had some more nourishing foods going into your body. And so all of that plays a role in the sense of weakness, but also the physical rebuilding of tissues and muscles. It can all impact it in either a positive way or not so positive way if some things are sort of depleted, if you're in a depleted state. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I want to go back because I think lately, one of the biggest things I hear still, and one of the biggest hurdles I think we as trainers, and well, physiotherapists have to, walk our clients through and work them is that the diastasis, I guess, healing it, minimizing it, however you want to put it, is not about closing the gap. It's not about the width of the gap. And, it's about strengthening the core, which you talk about so much, right? So forget about it. And I even put out a video about this. It's not about the gap. It's, about strengthening your core. So can you get into this? If it's not about the width of the gap, and you talked about it, it's not just that linea alba, which is the midline, that connective tissue. It's about the whole musculature in the abdomen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're spot on. And so where that comes from is actually just a reflection of sort of where we've been and where we're at now. There's actually been a change in how we see diastasis. So, as I was alluding to before, we used to sort of think about diastasis as a problem, we would link it to things like, back pain or core weakness. But and so in kind of looking at the linea alba, a widened linea alba as an issue, what we used to do was sort of go at it in more of a protective way. We would kind of use strategies to sort of protect the linea alba so we can help heal it.
Mm.
We would say, let's not do certain movements, let's not move in certain ways, let's not exercise and using certain exercises, because we want to make sure that the tissue here is given a chance to heal. And so there was that was sort of our initial conceptualization of it, but it then evolved, and then there was this change in how we saw it, from being something that just needs to be protected all the time and wear an abdominal support and all 24/7 and move in a very limited restrictive way. And then it changed to, okay, we can do some stuff now for your core. We can do some exercises for the inner core, like the transverse abdominis and the pelvic floor. So we actually are kind of in that right now. We're kind of there where we've acknowledged, okay, maybe the restrictions were actually holding a lot of people back in seeing the gains in strength, and just also the physical aesthetic changes. Maybe we were holding them back from even achieving it from what we were telling them to do or not to do. And so there's been a shift where now we're encouraging using some pelvic floor muscles and strengthening the inner core. And that is sort of, it could be taken too far as well, because that could be something that we do and only do. And if we really only look at the TA and the pelvic floor and the inner core muscles, again, we may be limiting the progress that we're making, considering the entire abdomen was stretched out. So
Mm.
now we are kind of emerging out of that and into the idea that, well, if the whole core was stretched out, if all of the abdominal muscles were stretched out, and the linea alba is included in that process, then what we kind of need to do is work on strengthening all of the abdominal muscles, including the inner core muscles, including the external core muscles, and kind of using all of the abdominal muscles to their best ability, sort of getting them to go under a process of loading where we gradually add challenging exercises to meet the person where they're at, to then kind of use it as an input into the tissue. And as that tissue is under stress, then it can begin to adapt and remodel and begin to thicken up, and the muscles can begin to hypertrophy. And then that can lead to changes in things like just the tone, the definition of the abdominal muscles, but also a change in the linea alba.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to go at, okay, let's work on stuff to reduce the gap. Let's look at the linea alba. What can we do for that?
Right.
So now what we're doing is we're like, okay, we can do all of these things in terms of exercise, in terms of lifestyle management, stress management, nutrition, sleep, etc. We can do all of these things, and that will impact the abdominal wall, including the linea alba.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like it's the more direct approach, rather than trying to go to the linea alba and
Right.
say, well, here, let's do certain things, because we just don't have any idea of what specifically is going to help. But what we know is just strengthening in general is really ultimately what leads to those changes.
Yeah, I love that because I had a client who, similar to you, she came to me. She's like, okay, I am 1 year postpartum. I'm trying to stand as still as I can all day. I'm trying not to rotate or turn and doing all these things. And it's like, she's so fearful of doing anything, which I
Right.
think is self-perpetuating the weakness,
Yeah.
right? Because she's not moving her core and functioning how she should. Like think about like just moving and giving your kid a bottle or a pacifier in the car, like these kind of very simple movements. And so, one of my clients, I just think about her right now, Mary, and we're on our 10th week together, and she has prolapse and she has diastasis, but in 10 weeks she's like, oh my gosh, we are working on boat pose and
Yeah.
crunches or the back lifts, right? And she's like, I never would have thought I could be doing this. So trying to get her back to doing those exercises. So yeah,
Beautiful.
you're so right, which leads very much into my next question and comment here. Quick search online or YouTube or Google will yield so many results for the worst exercise for diastasis, the best exercises, the best 5 exercises, the no exercises, the safe ones, the unsafe ones, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love that you're changing the narrative on that and just proclaiming that there are no bad exercises for DRA. There are no best exercises. And in fact, you had wrote there are in fact no even specific diastasis exercises, right? And I know this might blow some people's minds thinking, whoa,
Well,
how
now
can
what?
there not be specific diastasis exercises, right? So tell us, how is this possible and why core healing exercises are so, I guess, very specific to the individual.
Okay. Yeah. What an amazing question. So when you think of what the linea alba is, it is a piece of connective tissue. So connective tissue by nature, it's non-contractile. So it is not able to contract itself. If we had a muscle, let's say like the biceps, and there was a weakness there or an injury or something there, we would work on the muscle because we know we can strengthen that muscle. But the biceps has a tendon. So let's say if there was let's maybe an injury or a strain or a sprain to the tendon itself. Well, if there was some kind of injury to the tendon itself, then what we would do is we would work the muscle associated with it.
Right.
And so when we know that the contractile element can't really, the contractile element is what we use to influence the non-contractile
Okay.
element, then what we do and apply that to the abdominal wall, then what we're looking to do is work the abdominal muscles that attach onto the linea alba. So
Right.
knowing that the linea alba can't do very much for itself, it relies on the influence of the muscles around it.
Right.
And so the muscles around it are all of the abdominal muscles, all of them. So they all have the potential to influence the linea alba.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're going at when we're going online and we're seeing do these specific exercises or don't do these specific exercises, there's a misunderstanding there that we can actually do something that will specifically create a change in the linea alba over a period of time if we continually do that. Because really, the linea alba, when you look at it under a microscope, it is actually formed by layers and layers of connective tissue, and that those connective tissue layers again are from the muscles beside it. And
Mm-hmm.
so when the muscles contract, they will spread some of that load into the linea alba.
Right.
So if one contracts this way, it's going to kind of produce a bit of tension, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Mm-hmm.
It'll produce some sort of tension or loading into the linea alba through that contraction. But the muscles of the abdomen don't work by themselves. They don't work in isolation. So usually in real life, just in that example you provided, where you're reaching back to give your baby a pacifier, in that moment, we've got several muscles working at the same time, which means the linea alba is receiving influence from several muscles at the same time.
Right.
So what we're doing is we are using all of the muscles. So therefore, any exercise that uses the muscles is beneficial for promoting change in the linea alba. It's not that one is better than the other. They're all good. None of
Mhm.
them are bad. None of them are amazing. They're neutral.
Right.
They all have fair ability to influence change, but now it just comes down to, are you doing enough? Are we
Mhm.
using those muscles enough to really create that change? Because I feel like most people kind of get stuck in
Right.
the very gentle exercises, which isn't really enough of an input to create that stress response in the tissue that then creates that adaptation.
Exactly.
So all of the exercises, all core exercises are good core exercises and are also fair game to help improve the diastasis as well.
I always like to say that there's no off limit exercises, but it might not be right for you just yet. Maybe
Right.
in a few weeks, maybe in a couple months, but not yet. Okay, going back to my original question, no crunches, you're gonna make it worse. A couple crunches is not gonna make your diastasis worse. It's not gonna, widen the gap. However, my question to you is, over time, prolonged crunches or prolonged exercises that might not be right for somebody, maybe they're not doing crunches properly, maybe they're not doing the planks properly and they haven't learned how to engage their abdominal wall. Is that an exercise, or is that going to be something that could make it worse?
Yeah, so I think it's very helpful to have some parameters to know when is an exercise maybe pushing the limit too far for someone,
Hmm.
where if they continue to do that over and over and over and kind of ignore some of the signs that maybe their body is telling them, if they continue to do that, then potentially it could lead to some reaction, whether it means there's a further widening of the linea alba, or some issues like pelvic related issues, incontinence, prolapse. So yes, I think it's very helpful to have parameters.
Hmm.
What I would say is, for the most part, exercises generally speaking are not okay, so usually what we're looking at when we're talking about safety, it's about pressure management.
Hmm.
The amount of pressure that is being produced and how well your body is handling that pressure. And so it's not always about, let's do exercises that don't produce a lot of pressure. Because really, when we look at what you're doing with exercises and what we usually do during the day, the amount of pressure that we produce during these very controlled exercises, where we're in that moment, we're usually very mindful of what we're doing, very tuned in,
Hmm.
compared to what we do in the day, where we're just kind of on the go and sometimes mindlessly just doing whatever we need to do.
Right.
We often have much higher levels of pressure in our cores when we're doing that. So just knowing that kind of takes down the fear about, okay, this exercise is probably producing too much pressure. Therefore, so if we go down that train of thought, if okay, what we'll often hear is that there's too much pressure in my core. So my core, I'm actually straining my core, so I'm going to make things worse. So, and it's because of the pressure. So it's not so much about how much pressure you produce in your core. It's usually about how you're managing it. So again, let's go back to some of those parameters.
Right.
If you are doing an exercise, let's say a plank, for example, going back to the two that you mentioned, the crunch and the plank. So if we go back to the plank example and someone is trying to do a full plank, they're parallel to the ground, unmodified plank, and maybe it's their first time doing it since giving birth, or maybe they've just been holding off on doing it for a while because they were worried about it, but they haven't really done too many other exercises, and they're just going to jump right in and do this one. Now, there are some scenarios that could happen. They could go down into a plank and they might be able to do the plank just fine, meaning they're feeling what's happening in their body. They feel like they've got control over their body. And in terms of their core, they feel like they're able to keep things contained. they're able to draw in their abdomen and kind of hold it in inside of the plank.
Hmm.
And maybe if they slide a mirror underneath them, they'll be able to see what the core is doing too. And they're able to see that, okay, for the most part, things are kept inward and they have control over that. There may be a moment where they're breathing and they're inhaling and things kind of let go, but they see it and they're able to self-correct right in that moment and kind of re-engage and everything comes back in. So in that example, the person clearly demonstrated an ability to do the exercise and was not limited by the diastasis. They were
Hmm.
able to do it, they were able to have control over it. And so again, it's not so much about the exercise itself, but usually about how you're doing the exercise. And so the parameter there is, do you have the ability to control what you're doing? Is there so much pressure for your body to handle? Is it too much for your body to handle? Meaning, do you feel like your abdomen is really being pushed out
Hmm.
to its end limit? That's the limit that we need to sort of be a little cautious around.
Right.
Is your abdomen being stretched out to that limit? And if so, do you have control in that moment to bring it down away from that fully stretched state, or do you feel like it's still way too challenging of an exercise where even if you try to breathe differently, change your form, engage differently, it's still doing that? So in that case or in that scenario, I definitely wouldn't be recommending someone continue on at that level. I would scale back.
Right.
So if that person continued and did it and ignored all the signs, then we could potentially see some things happen down the line, maybe, maybe not, but it's sort of, that's where my parameter would be, is like
Right.
the stretched limit.
Right.
So going back to the crunch, which is a very different exercise, usually we don't see that kind of intense bulging. We may see a
Hmm.
little bit of movement of the abdomen when someone lifts their head up. So if we are doing a movement like that and we see a little bit of outwards sort of movement of the abdomen, and you feel the linea alba, there might be a little bit of doming, but it's very soft, like nothing's really taut and really being stretched and being pushed on from pressure underneath, then there, and of course, if you're assessing if they're leaking, if they have any pressure from,
Right.
like, let's say prolapse symptoms. So in that case, again, the exercise is actually quite beneficial because it's working on a very large muscle in the front of the abdomen that usually is very weak after pregnancy.
Right.
So the parameters are usually around, do you have pain? So I typically go through an acronym. And
Yes.
so it's, do you have pain anywhere in your body when you're doing something? We don't want to make any injury that you have worse, and we don't want to make any new injuries when you're starting an exercise
Right.
program. So any pain? Are you leaking? Whether it's incontinence or just a feeling like there's the possibility that you might have some leaking. So there's a sense of like, okay, I think I'm going to leak if I do this more.
Right.
So any leaking, any feelings of pressure inside of the pelvis, inside of the vagina, especially for those who have prolapse. Again, about core strategy. Do you feel like if you've been practicing working on your TA and your pelvic floor engagement, you've worked on coordinating it all, can you continue doing that inside of this exercise? Do you feel like you've got control over that? Like you're taking all those skills and now
Mhm.
you're using them inside of your strengthening. So do
Right.
you still feel like you can do all that stuff? Or is the exercise just way too hard for you to have control over those things? You
Right.
lose that control. So PLP and then core control. I have a whole slide on this, and I actually, if you don't mind, I can actually just bring up the slide. Can I share a screen?
Sure. Yeah, you have a really good, I think it's a couple of Instagram posts, or maybe it's all in one, but I think you highlighted it really well in Instagram.
That's exactly what I'm gonna bring
Okay.
up right now for
All
you.
right.
Can you enable share screen?
Oh, let's see. I haven't used that function before.
I wonder if it's under.
You know what? I will
You want to just link it?
I'm definitely gonna link your website and your Instagram to the
Okay.
description box below. So you guys will be able to see that for sure. Um,
Yeah.
but
So
I
it's just a simple acronym. It's PLPCCDEF. So the other letters, just quickly, are do you feel like you have control over your core, control over the core strategy? Do you feel like for D, doming is do you, it's not that if you have doming that you need to avoid the exercise, but if you have doming, is it excessive? Is it
Mhm.
so much that the tissues are being stretched out fully that and so taut that when you go and you feel it's actually very firm and hard under your fingers compared to if you see a little bit of doming, which is actually very expected and normal, and you go and you feel your linea alba and it feels soft, that is not straining the tissues in any way. And then E is, does the exercise feel easy for you? And F is, do you feel like you've got control over your form
Mhm.
for the whole duration of the exercise? Like you can do it your 10 repetitions or however many you're doing, and you have control over your body. So that's when it comes to how do I know if an exercise is right for me? How do I know if what I'm doing is too much? What am I looking for to help
Right.
me know if this is a good one for me? Well, that's where this acronym comes in really handy because these are sort of my parameters.
Mhm.
And usually, when it comes to diastasis, like your question is, will I make things worse if I continue doing this? We want to respect that tissues have a limit where they are, when they're stretched, if they're fully stretched and we're doing that repetitively, then it could lead to further weakening and straining of the tissue. But
Right.
most of the time, that's not where we're at in terms of strengthening. We're usually a little like underneath that. So,
Right. Right. I love that you have this acronym because I know a lot of people, and in the past, all we thought was, okay, it was pressure. We just thought, okay, doming, bad, right? And now we know that it's not the case. And we talk about hard dome and soft dome. But I also like that you have included, rightly and rightfully so, the stuff about the pelvic floor, because I know a lot of clients come to us and they just think it's their core, like right in here, my midsection, right? They don't know yet that it's their pelvic floor as well. So I love that you have the acronym letters in there about, pressure on your pelvis, and you kind of, okay, walk through all these things. All right, now let's go on to the next one.
yeah.
What also for myself, I was somebody when I had diastasis after my son. It wasn't. I didn't have the doming. I didn't have the coning. I just had a big belly. Like it was, So I really like that. It's not just about the dome right here down the middle. It's, do you have the excessive just pooch out, or as I call it, bread loafing, right?
Mhm.
And all those things come to play. So I really like, you hit on a lot of topics here, right?
I know I kind of threw in a whole
My
whole
next question.
things and so yeah, I apologize if that was all overwhelming, but
That's
if you go
okay.
through the acronym, you'll see that it's actually quite simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that because, as you said before, doming isn't bad and it doesn't equal weakness. So I like that you're telling us what else we need to look for. Okay,
Yeah.
so our last question, I want to talk about tension and why tension in the linea alba is important and how to create it. And I wish I had my mini band, resistance band, because this is how I always liken it to my clients, right? I just visualize your Instagram. You have kind of like this shape, right? And I
Yeah.
always liken our linea alba to taffy. Like I was an 80s kid. We ate this long thing of taffy, right? It's kind of stretchy and like it can go this way, but we don't want to be like lax. We want it to be nice and taut. So can you just quickly talk
Yeah.
about tension in the legs?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I can. So one, just the thought that came to my mind when you mentioned taffy was, okay, because you were doing this, right?
Hmm.
And so think of that as being one layer of the linea alba that is being pulled in that direction through, let's say, the transverse abdominis.
Right?
But think of additional layers of taffy on top of that being
Hmm.
pulled in other directions. So now
Right.
we've got a collection of layers that are being pulled in different directions, and that is the linea alba. And whenever the muscles are engaged and are therefore sort of taking up any slack in that linea alba tissue, and it's now taut, that is tension. And that can happen through different means. We can do that through the TA muscle, which is what a lot of people are becoming more familiar with and comfortable with. It's something that is being taught a lot. So there's this way of engaging that uses the TA muscle by drawing in the abdomen, and what that does is it just takes the linea alba from being sort of slack and it goes like this and it's now taut. And
Right.
so when we have that slack taken up, we now can do more. We can do more with that. So that's like kind of the first level of, if we call this loading,
Right.
tension, loading, we can somewhat use them interchangeably because like that's just a little bit of loading. We've added a little bit of load there. But
Hmm.
then what we can do is we can use the muscles and contract even harder. And so now there's even more load going through the linea alba. And so we can add even more exercise or even a more challenging exercise, which then might add even more load and stimulus to the linea alba. So tensioning is sort of like this gentle, kind of the way I see it, it's like the gentle initiation of loading. But if we continue using those muscles and working them a bit harder, they're going to tug on the linea alba a bit harder
Hmm.
and even more and more over time as you just work those muscles through challenging exercises. So what you're doing is just sort of seeing that there's different levels of tension or different levels of loading, and ultimately we want to go from not even just tensioning the linea alba but loading the linea
Hmm.
alba. So it's like kind of taking it one step further.
Right.
And so we used to only go with the thought of closing the gap. The
Hmm.
linea alba is wide. Okay, so we need to do things to reduce the size of the gap.
Right.
And so there, with a very popular study that talked about this topic of tension, there was a massive shift in what we were doing, and what our goals were for someone who had diastasis, which is now let's tension. And so maybe some of your audience will be familiar with the term of like depth. So
Hmm.
we're feeling for how not only how wide, but how far your fingers can go through.
Right.
And what we're doing with that is getting a sense of that connective tissue integrity.
Hmm.
And so it's a way to sort of quantify or sense how, what is the status of your connective tissue.
Right.
And so one way to assess that, at least through muscle contraction, is just using your muscles and feeling if the linea alba goes from feeling quite soft
Hmm.
to feeling more firm. And that's basically what tension is just
Hmm.
going from soft to firm. And then that is what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. It's that sort of loading process that creates the change that can, well, we're giving it the chance to create change as much as we can. So we're providing the load, the input, the stimulus for it
Hmm.
to adapt. And so we need something there. It can't, if it's very soft inside when you do an exercise, then it's not really going to, that part of your abdomen may not see a lot of change with that exercise, but that's where variety comes into play, because
Right.
some exercises are going to be much better at creating tension. You'll feel like, oh wow, that's really firm. And some you won't feel as firm, but maybe that exercise is amazing for building strength in certain muscles that you just can't achieve in other ways. So once you start layering and stacking the different exercises into a program, some that will produce better tension than others, some that will target different muscles,
Hmm.
then you're kind of working at it a bit more globally and not just thinking about how do I close this gap.
Right. And not doing endless amounts of heel slides and clamshells, right? So I love that you're always talking about, resistance bands and creating I'm drawing a blank here, but yeah, like just you need resistance and we need the load in order to see more progress. Which leads me to just closing here. Can you tell us the free offer that you have for moms? And I believe it has something to do with these top things you might be doing if you're not progressing in your diagnosis.
Yes, exactly. So it's The top 10 reasons why your diastasis may not be getting better and what to do about it.
Right.
And so it's a free guide where I go through some of the common roadblocks that people experience and some of the reasons why they hit a plateau. And what I can say is, for most of the people that I'm seeing, it's generally that they're not doing enough.
Hmm.
And there's a whole reason behind that. Of course, there's a lot of fear. They're not doing enough because they may be told not to do things, and so they're holding themselves back, um, or they just don't know how. They may not be exercisers, so
Right.
there's like they're not familiar with exercising.
Hmm.
But it seems like we're not doing enough, and so if we start adding more load, more exercising, more challenging exercises, then we can potentially start seeing those changes start to take place after that. So if
Right.
you're not seeing a lot of change, let's look at your exercise program. It's one piece of the whole puzzle,
Hmm.
but it is an important piece of that conservative management. So let's see if you're actually progressing yourself or if you're just doing heel slides and bridges and clamshells.
Right. Okay. And I'll put the link down in the description box so everybody can click and get that for free.
Perfect.
Can you tell us where to find you? I'm going to have your Instagram here, but tell us what courses you have to offer fitness professionals like myself, as well as moms.
Oh, okay, amazing. Yeah, so I definitely work with moms with diastasis, and I definitely do help professionals understand the condition and try to help them through it as well. So if you are a fitness or a rehab professional, I do have a full course on diastasis that pretty much gives you kind of the A to Z about the condition. And a lot of the a lot of the uncertainty around exercise and what you can do and what you shouldn't do, and there's a lot of that even within the professionals
Hmm.
themselves. So what my course does is it kind of debunks it all and gives you a lot of the research behind it and just explains it in a very simplistic way and gives you an example of how to do exercises with your clients, like a progression. So that way you kind of have it laid out for you and you can take it from there, and you won't have as much fear and bring that to the table.
Right.
You'll bring more empowerment. And then if you are a mom that has diastasis and you're just kind of looking for ways to progress your core, that's what I created the program for moms. It's for that specific reason. Is I just didn't think people were going far enough. So I created a program that teaches them how to progress their exercises if they're kind of in that stuck doing the gentle contractions and coordinating and working on just posture, and there's more to it. So if
Right.
you're looking what else can I do, that's what the program is for.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll put that in the links down below. And Manira, can you share us your website so we know where to find you?
Sure. It's www.munirahudanipT.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for helping us to distill that research and getting what is really going on and what we need to be continuing to do. So thank you so much for all you do for us, fitness professionals, as well as moms out there.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.